today we'll look into another critic, Alexander Pope, who lived around 1688 to 1744. Well, it is quite possible. In fact, I believe all of you must have read him at some point or the other. In fact, I believe it is not uh, quite possible for anyone to have gone through 2 years of UG English literature, BA English literature, without having read Pope or admired him for his poetry. Well, for me, he is one of the finest. In fact, most critics would agree with me. He is one of the finest poets, greatest poets England has ever produced. Well, of course, after Shakespeare. And also, I saw it somewhere that he is one of the most frequently quoted poets after Shakespeare. So you see, he is the kind of person who excelled in writing satires. Well, just because his satires were biting remarks or on the prevailing corruption of his time, it does not mean he lowered his standards in terms of composition. He was known for perfecting um, the heroic couplet after Dryden, and his most of his verses have become popular idioms and in common parlance, damning with faint praise and all that, or the um, study of mankind is man, yeah, true study of what mankind is man, something it goes along that line. He Most of his quotes have so much depth in them that you would always, I believe I have seen most of his quotes hung on placards in educational institutions. Maybe you too must have come across this one: fools rush in where angels fear to tread, or a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the pear in spring. Or the proper study of mankind, as I said earlier, the proper study of mankind is man. And yeah, all nature is but art unknown to thee. True wit is nature to advantage dressed, what oft was thought, but ne'er so well expressed. I mean, this is one of my favorites actually. True wit is nature to advantage dressed, what oft was thought, but never so well expressed. It's lovely. The way he writes is awesome. You should try to read a bit of poetry. Um, you would know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so coming to his critical works, he wrote quite a bit of criticism, but here a few are mentioned for your sakes. An essay on criticism is supposed to be an essay. I've left out the "an" here. An essay on criticism, preface to the works of Shakespeare, Art of Sinking, the imitation of the epistle of Horace to Augustus, preface to the translation of the Iliad. Now, essay on criticism would be one of the finest major poems written by Alexander Pope. You see, it also came in first in fragmentary drafts, okay, and later on it was composed together in heroic couplets with adjacent rhyming lines of iambic pentameter. It is in the essay on criticism that he writes about substandard poetry, how poets seem to not really, put in the creative effort required to make good poetry, compose good poetry. See, for instance, at one point he says, "And 10 low words oft creep in one dull line, while they ring round the same unvaried chimes." You know, and 10 low words oft creep in one dull line. Imagine 10 words, low words at that, not even high, words that are cheap, that you are useless, that are valueless, okay? And these 10 words make one dull line, a line that does not even spark your imagination, that kind of line. What point is of that line? While they ring round the same unvaried chimes. Like chimes is in music, something that creates music, right? So if you are or like listening it for the first time or maybe a couple of times, you might enjoy the sound behind it, the musical quality of the chimes, right? But if this unvarying monotonous chime goes on and on, you would be dreadfully bored, right? So what do? You want to just be done with it and shut that up. It is there has to be certain variation. So he is referring to, the kind of poets who don't take the required requisite effort to create good poetry or brilliant poetry. So, so essay and criticism speaks on so many things, even though it is called an essay, but is sheer poetry. That's why I've included it in both the critical works and his creative works. See, essay and and he wrote something on preface to the works of Shakespeare, in which he, though his preface to the works of Shakespeare was not a commercial success per se, mainly because Poe regarded Shakespeare's text as being corrupt, rife with additions, expunctions, transpositions of scenes and lines, confusion of characters and persons, all sorts of things. Okay, he accused Shakespeare's. I mean, he did not really accuse Shakespeare, but basically he accused all the people who tampered with Shakespeare's work. Okay, and he found fault with most of the things that were that did not bear the mark of Shakespeare's hand. Okay, so preface to the works of Shakespeare, though it was not a commercial success during its production, during its time, during its printing, it still garnered much attention from the critics of Shakespeare. Okay, it contributed to the canon of all the Shakespeare's critical work. Okay, and then as far as art of sinking is concerned, I don't know why I put a comma there. As far as art of sinking is concerned, it made its mark mainly because of Pope created all the ways, or sort of delineated all the ways you could write bad poetry. you know you always have, you tend to see a list of things you need to do to create good poetry, right? Here Alexander Pope gives you a list of things, or various methods you could create bad poetry. It is the art of singing, how you can put your poetic ship can sink, right? And it's really funny, while trying to achieve certain sublimity, making poetry sublime, people tend to fail ridiculously. Okay, it is really funny. You should read that as well. And the imitation of the epistle of Horace to Augustus, basically a satire. Okay, though even though it is Pope uses the model of Horace to create the satire, it satirizes the life under George II of Great Britain. Okay, especially what he regarded as the widespread corruption tainting the country under Prime Minister Robert Walpole's influence, and the poor quality of the court's artistic taste. So you see, he also added this wholly original poem and an epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot to as an introduction to his imitations. So even though the imitation of the epistle of Horace to Augustus itself is good enough, it's great enough, it's mainly known for of this little piece he added to the beginning, an epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot. It's really beautiful, the way he has written that epistle. Again, preface to the translations of Iliad, well, it includes all the translations he wrote of Homer, and it too included quite a bit of criticism. Now, as far as his creative works are concerned, The Rape of the Lock, this is one of the things that I first read during my first year UG. So it was wonderful. I mean, I can still remember the characters of Belinda, and how a certain person snips away a lock of hair. It's actually based on a very real quarrel that happened between two families during Pope's time. So just and it has a very funny background. It's not not a very serious situation here, and mainly because of the levity of the text, it is a fine form of mock epic, mock epic poetry. And then the Dunciad, it also, see, this Dunciad, it came in a series actually. He wrote various volumes, quite a few volumes, and with each passing volume, he earned so many enemies. Okay, it was basically satire on the politicians of his time, the nobility of his time, the aristocracy. Well, of course, nobility and aristocracy both are same. Anyway, he earned himself quite a few enemies. In fact, there is well, I don't know if I've already mentioned this. He actually used to carry a gun with him when he would take his dog for a walk, it seems. So Danciad was also pretty famous. I mean, he is known for this particular work. Apart from his various other works, translations of the works of Homer, as I mentioned here, prefers to the translation of the Iliad. Essay on Man. Well, how could we forget Essay on Man? See, one fine feature of the Essay on Man is that it acts very much against, or rather, in particular contradiction to Milton's Paradise Lost. See, in Paradise Lost, what Milton does is he makes a concerted effort to rationalize, or rather vindicate the ways of God to man, right? Milton tries to vindicate the ways of God to man. But in the Essay on Man, he Alexander Pope does the actual opposite. Okay, he reverses and he tries to rationalize the ways of man to God. Okay, it's as if he is speaking about men to God, speaking about all the flaws that men have and how they need to be given certain leave for being so weak. At one point, or rather in the beginning itself, he says, "Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man." As in, he seems to um, speak of how man, to understand the whole mankind, all you need is man. Don't expect God to scan you. Don't expect God to explain to you, right? Uh, anyway, we can talk about it all, and we'll never come to an end here. And well, there were other works as well, Ode on Solitude and Essay on Criticism, which we will look at a little more, not in detail, but a little more, uh, you know, closely. Anyway, Essay on Criticism, it is modeled on Horace's Ars Poetica, Vida's De Arte Poetica, Boileau's L'Art Poetique, Scheffel's Essay on Satire and Essay on Poetry, Roscommon's Essay on Translated Verse, Granville's Essay upon Unnatural Flights in Poetry. And the main concern here is not poetry but the art of criticism. In all of it, he speaks of poetry, but he doesn't speak of poetry here, but mainly the art of criticism, how to criticize poetry. Because to him, criticism led to composition of good poetry. So he mainly seemed to have relied on the ancient here, Horace, Vida, Boileau, I mean Renaissance writers, European writers of Renaissance, and Sheffield, Roscommon, and Granville were English writers, native writers. So he not merely depended on the classics, classical writers, but also the modern writers of Europe and the native English writers. And his chief concern, is not poetry but the art of criticism. Now, when you look at an essay on criticism, what you see is it is divided into three parts. So, line 1 to 200 bears a general observation on the art of criticism. It depends on natural endowments, training in craft, and study of rules and great works of antiquity. As in, these first 200 lines, they mainly deal with general observations. What what observations do they make? They make observations on the art of criticism. And how does a person become a good critic? Mainly because of the natural endowments or the natural gift. Okay, one has to be naturally gifted to have to become a good critic. And training in the craft, see, you not only need to have natural endowments, you also need to be trained in the job of writing criticism. And also, apart from the natural endowments and training in craft, what you need is study of rules as to how or what are the criteria on which you judge a certain work. So those rules you need to study, and also great works of antiquity. You need to look into all the classics, all the works of the ancient writers. Okay, so these are the basic requirements of a good critic. As we saw earlier, in terms of Dryden, how Dryden himself considered these almost say these same things, right? You need natural gift, you also need training, and need to know the rules and great works of antiquity. Now, line 201, 201 to 559, they enumerate the causes of wrong criticism. Causes of wrong criticism, as in why certain, you know, poor criticism creeps into um, the the arena of literary criticism. So, what are the causes of wrong criticism? Moral, psychological, and literary. He finds out, or he believes that these are the three main causes for poor criticism. Either a person is not morally sound, or not psychologically um, trained or conditioned to really judge a poetry, nor does that person have a literary taste, proper literary taste. So a person needs to be both morally stable, as in morally sound, must have a psychological conditioning to analyze certain poetry or certain work of art, and also should be aware of all the literature behind it. Okay, should have a certain taste, developed a certain taste in literature to judge good writing. Now, line 560 to 744 lays down rules for the critic. So, it first of all, he tries to tell you what exactly criticism is, how the art of criticism exists, and what it depends on. Then we see why certain people end up making poor judgment of any work due to certain reasons. And finally, in the third part of his on essay on criticism, he lays down rules for the critic, mentioning the best ones from Aristotle to those whom Pope considered great in his own country. Okay, in the last part, what does he do? He lays down rules for the critic, telling exactly or mentioning mainly the best ones from Aristotle to those of his own country. He not only relies on the classics, he not only relies on the ancients of Europe, but also his own people. I believe I have taken enough time today, and it's growing late, so I'll cut it short for now. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll meet again tomorrow. Till then, take care. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.